The city was still dreaming when the first mural struck, a vicious slash of black and crimson clawing its way across the crumbling brick of an abandoned warehouse downtown, the paint dripping like fresh blood under the sickly orange glow of a flickering street lamp, a wild mess of jagged lines and cryptic symbols that looked like nothing until you stepped back, blinked through the dawn haze, and saw it, tomorrow, scratched and faint, uneven strokes across the chaos, a word that didn't explain, didn't comfort, but hung there like a noose tightening around the morning's throat. I found it by accident that day, my boots scuffing the cracked pavement, a styrofoam cup of bitter, lukewarm coffee trembling in my hand, the air thick with exhaust fumes, and the low growl of a waking skyline, horns bleating, commuters shoving past, the usual grind of a city too tired to care. Nobody noticed it at first, just another smear of urban decay, until some kid with a phone snapped a blurry shot and tossed it online with a half-assed caption. "Weird art downtown, WTF?" That was the match. The internet caught fire by noon. Reddit threads spiraling out of control, Twitter hashtags trending hard, Instagram flooded with reposts, every bored scroll junkie and armchair sleuth piling in, throwing theories like grenades. A prank, a cult signal, a viral ad campaign gone off the rails. I lingered there longer than I meant to, my breath fogging in the early chill, my eyes tracing the jagged curves, the way the black bled into the red, something gnawing at the back of my skull, an itch I couldn't scratch, a whisper telling me this wasn't random, wasn't some punk with a spray can. This had weight, purpose, a pulse I could almost hear. I'd been freelancing for years, chasing scraps of stories for local rags, my apartment a graveyard of notebooks, cigarette butts, and half-dead laptops, my name, Elliot Kane, barely a flicker in the bylines. But this hit different, raw, alive, a vein under the city's skin I hadn't tapped since the corruption bust that got me hooked on this gig a decade back. I pulled out my phone, snapped my own pics, the paint still wet in spots, the air sharp with a chemical bite that stung my nose, and posted them to a niche forum I lurked on. No caption, just the raw images, letting the vultures tear into it. They did. Within hours, the views spiked past thousands, comments stacking up like bricks. Who did this? What's tomorrow mean? Some psycho's manifesto? The kind of frenzy that turns a nobody into a legend before the sun sets. I dug into the threads that night, my apartment dim, the glow of my screen carving shadows across the peeling walls, my coffee cold now, my fingers tapping restlessly as I scrolled, the mural's word looping in my head. Tomorrow, tomorrow, tomorrow. A drumbeat I couldn't shake, a riddle I couldn't solve. Then the hammer dropped. A warehouse fire 3 blocks away erupted that night, flames clawing the sky, sirens wailing through the streets, a blaze that swallowed half the building before the trucks even rolled up. No cause named, no suspects, just ash and smoke curling into the dark. The internet lost its damn mind, tying it to the mural faster than the news could report it. Screenshots of my pics next to grainy clips of the inferno, users screaming prophecy, proof, anything but chance, the word tomorrow branded into their theories like a hot iron. I walked back at dawn, the mural untouched, the air still thick with soot, cops cordoning off the charred wreckage nearby, reporters swarming like flies, phones out, voices clashing, my head spinning as I stared at that word again, tomorrow, its letters mocking me, daring me to dig, to chase, to believe it wasn't coincidence. The forums birthed a name by morning, Shadow, a tag some random threw out that stuck like tar. A phantom artist painting doom, his first mark already a myth, his reach clawing beyond the city's edges. My inbox pinged non-stop. Tips, guesses, a blurry photo from a night owl claiming they'd seen a figure in a hoodie near the wall hours before the fire, too dark to make out, just a silhouette against the sodium glow, but enough to fuel the hunt, enough to sink hooks into me. I leaned back in my creaking chair, my pulse thudding in my ears, the city's underbelly stirring in ways I hadn't seen, hadn't felt, and I knew, This was no stunt, no game. This was something bigger, something alive, something that'd drag us all down if we didn't find him first. Tomorrow was gone now, burned to cinders, and the next mark was coming. I could feel it in my gut, a countdown ticking louder, sharper, deadlier, and I was already in too deep, my hands itching for the next thread, the next sign. The next disaster Shadow would paint into being, and I couldn't look away. The second mural landed like a thunderclap 2 days later, smeared across the rusted shell of a water tower perched on the city's ragged edge, its paint glistening wet under a bruised-on sky that bled purple and gray, a tangle of white and gold streaks twisting into a shape that hit me like a fist to the chest, a clock with no hands, its fractured numbers melting into each other like wax, and beneath it, gouged and jagged, desperate cuts. The word, "Soon!" I got the tip at 4 a.m., my phone buzzing me out of a shallow sleep, my eyes gritty as I fumbled for jeans and boots, the city still half dead outside my window, streets slick with overnight rain, the air heavy with a silence that felt wrong, too thick, too loaded. I drove out, my tires hissing on wet asphalt, my headlights carving through the gloom, the tower's silhouette looming ahead, a hulking relic of the industrial sprawl, and there it was, bolder, wilder than the first, the paint dripping like it had been slung in a hurry, like whoever did it raced the light, their breath still hanging in the mist. I climbed the chain-link fence, barbed wire snagging my sleeve, my pulse sharp in my throat, the metal cold and slick under my palms as I steadied my camera, the flash bouncing off the chaos, every angle screaming haste, every stroke a taunt that clawed at my nerves. I posted the pics before the sun breached the horizon, my fingers shaky on the keys, the forums already simmering from the first mural, Shadow's name a virus now, spreading with every click, every share, every wild leap, views rocketing past hundreds of thousands, comments piling up like debris. What's with the clock? Soon for what? This guy's unhinged. The kind of chaos that turns a ghost into a god. I stood there too long, the wind slicing through my jacket, my boots sinking into the muddy gravel, my mind racing. 2 murals, 2 words, 2 disasters if the fire was any hint, and the threads were already buzzing with it, tying, tomorrow, to the blaze, soon, to whatever came next, a pattern I couldn't unsee. The city woke up around me, trucks rumbling in the distance, birds scattering from the tower's peak, my phone buzzing with notifications, my chest tight with something I couldn't name, anticipation, dread, a hunger to know. And then it happened, the second blow. A gas leak downtown that afternoon, an explosion tearing through a diner I'd eaten at a week ago, windows shattering like brittle bones, 3 dead. The news screaming panic while the internet screamed shadow. I pulled over at a gas station. My hands wrapped around a scalding coffee I didn't drink, my screen a battlefield of caps lock rants and shaky pics, users claiming the clock's fractured numbers matched the diner's address, 12-3-7, a stretch, but it stuck, others posting clips of the blast, tying it to soon. The timing too neat, too brutal. My inbox was a deluge, tips from night owls, photos of shadows near the tower, a grainy video of a figure climbing down, hoodie up, paint cans clanking, vanishing before the frame sharpened, enough to keep the hunt alive, enough to keep me tethered to it. I watched it loop, my pulse hammering in my ears, the city's pulse hammering with it. Every corner alive now, phones out, eyes peeled, hunting for the next mark, the next clue, the next catastrophe Shadow might summon. I drove back, the mural's gold streaks burned into my vision, soon, clawing at my skull, a word too vague to hold, too close to dodge, too real to ignore. I knew it wasn't done, knew the rhythm was tightening, knew the internet was a beast awake and ravenous, and I was its willing prey. The forum cemented. Shadow. That night, the name a brand now, a myth forged from 2 walls and 2 tragedies, his reach spilling beyond the city. Beyond sanity, international threads popping up, tomorrow, and Soon, dissected in French, Spanish, Japanese, a global fever I couldn't outrun. I sat in my dim apartment, the glow of my laptop the only light, my notes sprawling across the table, times, locations, paint brands, weather patterns, anything to pin him down, my coffee cold again, my hands jittery, my gut screaming he was out there, watching, waiting, plotting. A new post hit at midnight. A user claiming they'd found a third site, an old railway bridge north of the river, tagged with a single, chilling line. Watch! I grabbed my keys, my heart slamming against my ribs, the city's shadows stretching longer, darker, hungrier now, and I knew. Shadow wasn't just painting walls, he was painting terror, carving it into the world's skin, and we were all hooked, desperate, trapped in his game, racing toward whatever, soon, had promised, and I couldn't stop, wouldn't stop, not until I saw what he'd bleed onto the next canvas. The third mark wasn't a mural. It was a wound, a single word hacked into the rusted steel of an old railway bridge straddling the city's northern fringe. Watch, carved deep and brutal, the letters jagged and uneven, glinting under a moon half smothered by clouds, a warning that didn't need paint to sink its claws into you, a scar that demanded you look, demanded you fear. I got there past midnight, my car rattling over gravel and broken asphalt, the bridge rising ahead, like a skeletal beast against the night sky, its beams groaning in the wind, the air thick with rust and the dank, sour breath of the river below. The tip came from a forum post, a shaky photo uploaded with no explanation, just, "Found this, Shadow?" And the internet ignited again, likes and shares avalanching, my boots hitting the ground before the engine coughed out, my flashlight slicing through the dark, the beam trembling as it caught the word, each letter a gash in the metal, each edge a blade against my nerves. Fresh enough I could smell the steel's bite, raw enough I could feel the hand that cut it. I ran my fingers over it, the surface rough and cold, the cut still sharp, the work of a knife, not a brush, and my skin crawled. This wasn't art anymore, this was violence, a shift that turned my stomach, a message that didn't play, didn't tease, but ordered, stared, judged. I uploaded my shots, the flash bleaching the steel, the words dark against the void, my post blunt. Third sign. North Bridge. Shadows changing. And the forums went berserk, threads fracturing like glass, users howling about escalation, about knives over cans, about what watch meant after tomorrow, and soon. The fire and explosion still festering in their minds, the death toll a shadow over every guess. I lingered, the wind tugging at my coat, my eyes scanning the blackness below, the river's murmur a low growl under the bridge's creaks, my phone buzzing wild. Thousands watching, then millions. Shadow's name a plague now, a specter no one could pin, no one could outrun. Then the news crashed in. A train derailment an hour later, 10 miles east, cargo cars flipped like toys, a chemical spill smoking into the night, no deaths yet, but injuries stacking, chaos spilling, and the internet lashed it to watch. Before the smoke settled, the bridge's scar a spotlight on ruin. I drove to the derailment site, my headlights piercing fog, sirens flashing red and blue ahead, hazmat suits moving like phantoms through the haze, the air acrid with burning plastic and sulfur, my hands tied on the wheel as I parked, my phone already open, forums a war zone, my photo of watch, next to drone shots of twisted metal, users swearing the derailment was Shadow's next hit, the timing too perfect, the wreckage too loud. My inbox drowned in noise, tips from insomniacs, threats from skeptics, a grainy still from a security cam near the bridge, a figure in black, face hidden, knife glinting under a street lamp, gone in a heartbeat, enough to keep the hunt raging, enough to chain me to it. I walked the perimeter, my boots crunching glass and gravel, my chest tight, my ears ringing with sirens and shouts, the city's heartbeat pounding in sync with mine. Every shadow a suspect, every wall a threat, shadows with growing fangs, sinking them deep into the world's flesh. The threads crowned him a prophet by dawn, a seer with a blade, a saboteur with a plan, his marks no longer guesses but decrees, news outlets jumping in. Mystery vandal tied to disasters. Trending hard, my name buried in the static, just another voice in the swarm screaming his name. I sat in my car, the engine off, my laptop balanced on my knees, my notes a snarl of dates, maps, and half-formed theories, 3 signs, 3 disasters, a rhythm I couldn't break, a chase I couldn't abandon. The forums buzzed with sightings, paint cans near a shuttered factory, a shadow on a rooftop, whispers of a foresight, no proof, just hunger, and my gut twisted, my coffee spilling across the seat, my head pounding. Shadow was evolving, escalating, watching us watch him, and I knew it wasn't over, knew the pattern was a noose tightening around us all. A new post dropped as the sun rose, a user claiming they'd seen it, a neon spiral on the factory's loading dock, coordinates attached, no photo, just a taunt, and my blood ran hot, my keys already turning, the city sprawling dark and restless around me, shadows grip choking the air, the world begging for answers, for him, for the next cut, and I was speeding toward it, blind, addicted, terrified of what Watch had set in motion, what it had summoned next. The 4 sign wasn't subtle. It roared, a massive spiral of neon green and violet spiraling across the cracked concrete of a shuttered factory's loading dock, its coils tightening inward like a vortex, sucking the eye toward a center where, now, sat in bold, dripping letters, the paint still tacky under a midday sun that burned too bright, too harsh, doing nothing to thaw the ice in my veins. I'd raced there after the forum tip, my car skidding into the deserted lot, tires kicking up clouds of gravel and dust, the coordinates spot on, the factory a hulking corpse of rusted pipes, shattered windows, and peeling paint, its silence shattered by this garish, pulsing wound that screamed louder than anything Shadow had done before. I climbed out, my camera shaking in my hands, the spiral dragging me in, hypnotic, disorienting, nauseating, the word now thumping like a heartbeat, a command, a deadline, a trap I couldn't peel my eyes from. I stood there, sweat beading on my neck, my ears ringing with the distant hum of traffic, my boots sticking to wet patches of paint, my shadows stretching long and thin across the concrete, a witness to something I couldn't grasp. Something that felt like it was grasping me. I uploaded the shots from the lot, my signal flickering in the industrial wasteland, my fingers numb on the keys, my post raw. 4th mark. Factory. Shadow says now. And the internet imploded, servers buckling under the flood of traffic, hashtags spiking like fever spikes, Shadow's name a wildfire tearing through every platform, millions dissecting the spiral, the word, the leap from cryptic cuts to neon chaos, from bridges to open daylight, from whispers to shouts. I stayed too long, the sun baking my skin, the air thick with solvent fumes, and the faint rot of forgotten machinery, my mind reeling. For signs, for words, each tied to wreckage, each bolder, closer, now here, now unavoidable, now alive in a way that made my chest ache with dread. Then it crashed down, a power grid failure that afternoon, half the city plunged into black, traffic lights dead, horns blaring like a chorus of the damned, hospitals scrambling on generators, no deaths yet, but panic spreading like ink through water, and the forums lit up, now, bolted to the blackout, the spiral's neon aflare in a city gone dark. I drove through the gridlock, my radios spitting static and emergency alerts. My windshield streaked with sweat and dust, my phone buzzing non-stop, my screen a torrent of posts, users swearing the spiral's coils traced outage zones, a wild leap that stuck like glue, others digging into power company logs, tying it to Shadow's timing, his reach, his curse, their words frantic, fevered, alive with fear and awe. My inbox was a swamp, Tips from hackers claiming they trace paint suppliers. A shaky video of a figure scaling the factory fence. Paint cans clanking in broad daylight. Hoodie up, face a blur, vanishing into the glare. Enough to stoke the fire, enough to chain me tighter to the chase. I parked near a dead intersection, my hands slick on the wheel, my eyes scanning every wall, every shadow, every flicker of movement. The city was a tinderbox now, phones out, voices loud, shadows with growing horns, sinking roots into every crack, every fear, every hope we'd catch him before he struck again. The threads dubbed him a puppet master by nightfall, a chaos god pulling levers, his signs no longer riddles but orders. News vans swarming the factory, my photos plastered on every broadcast. Shadow strikes again! In bold, screaming red, my name a faint echo in the credits, drowned in the roar of a world obsessed. I sat in my apartment, the power still out, my laptop glowing on its last battery, my notes a sprawl of maps, timelines, and frantic scribbles. 4 marks, for disasters, a rhythm I couldn't shatter, a hunt I couldn't escape. The air was thick with humidity, my coffee black and bitter, my head throbbing. Shadow was everywhere, nowhere, a ghost with a voice, a shadow with a pulse, and I couldn't shake him, couldn't outrun him. A new tip hit as the clock ticked past midnight. A user swearing they'd seen a 5th mark, a red slash on a billboard by the docks, no proof, just a frantic claim in all caps. It's there, go now! And my stomach dropped, my keys already in my fist, the city sprawling dark and wild around me, shadows gripped strangling tighter, the world screaming for truth, for him, for the next blow, and I was running toward it, blind, hooked, drowning in the neon echo of now, terrified of what it had called down. Next, what did it force us to see? The 5th mark was a gash, a brutal slash of red paint streaking down a faded billboard teetering over the docks, its surface flaking from decades of salt wind and neglect. The word, here, scrawled in thick, uneven strokes that bled into the rusted frame, a marker glowing through the haze of a fog-choked evening that swallowed the city whole. I chased the tip from the forum, my car weaving through narrow, twisting streets, the docks unfurling ahead, cranes piercing the mist like skeletal fingers, the air heavy with brine, diesel, and the faint rot of stagnant water, my headlights catching the billboard's edge as I screeched to a stop, my breath snagging in my throat at the sight. Raw, messy, urgent, the red stark against the gray decay, a beacon I couldn't ignore. A wound that pulsed with intent. I climbed out, my boots splashing in oily puddles, my camera steady now despite the shake in my hands, the flash popping against the paint, the word, here, glaring back, a pin stabbed into a map, a spotlight on a stage, a dare that sank hooks into my chest. I stood there, the fog curling around my legs, my ears full of distant ship horns and the slap of waves against pilings, my eyes locked on. Here! My gut twisting with a certainty this was closer, louder, shadows stepping out of the dark. Showing his teeth, I posted it from the waterfront, my fingers numb on the screen, my signal weak in the damp air, my words cutting. 5th sign. Docks. Shadows here. And the internet detonated, servers groaning under the weight of millions, threads multiplying like weeds. Shadow's name a thunderbolt cracking every platform. Users clawing at the red slash. The word, the shift from neon spirals to blood streaks. From factories to open water. From vague threats to a pinpoint strike. I lingered, the fog thickening, my coat clinging to my skin, my flashlight tracing the billboard's edges, the paint still wet in spots, the air sharp with its chemical bite. 5 signs, 5 words, each a step deeper into madness, each a scream tearing through the silence, each a disaster waiting to land, and this one felt final, immediate, a declaration I couldn't unhear. Then it struck. A cargo ship collision that night, 2 steel behemoths grinding together in the harbor, metal screeching, oil spilling black and slick into the water, horns blaring, crews shouting through the mist, no deaths, but the damage was catastrophic, millions lost, and the forums erupted. Here, bolted to the crash, the red slash a bullseye on the docks, a mark that hit too close, too hard. I drove to the chaos. My windshield streaked with mist and grime, my radio crackling with coast guard chatter, my phone buzzing wild, my screen a flood of posts. Users swearing the slash's angle mirrored the collision's trajectory, a wild theory that stuck like tar. Others digging into shipping manifests, tying it to Shadow's timing, his reach, his venom, their words frantic, obsessive, alive with terror and thrill. My inbox was a cesspool. Tips from dock workers claiming they'd heard footsteps that night. A shaky clip of a figure sprinting near the billboard, red paint staining their hands, hoodie up, swallowed by fog before the lens caught more, enough to fuel the frenzy, enough to drag me deeper into the spiral. I parked by the water's edge, my boots slipping on oil-slick stones, my chest heaving, my ears ringing with the grind of salvage cranes and the shouts of men in yellow vests. The city's heartbeat pounded with mine, every shadow a hunter, every wall a warning, Shadow's legend-growing claws, sinking them into every nerve, every hope we'd catch him before he struck again. The threads hailed him a harbinger by morning, a Shadow King calling shots. His marks no longer hints, but proclamations, news. Helicopters buzzing the docks like vultures, my shots plastered on every feed. Shadow's deadly game. In screaming caps, my name a faint murmur in the credits, lost in the howl of a world consumed. I sat in my car, the engine idling, my laptop glowing on the dash, my notes a maze of lines, dates, and frantic guesses, 5 signs, 5 disasters, a code I couldn't crack, a chase I couldn't quit. The air was damp, my coffee spilled across the seat, my head splitting. Shadow was everywhere, nowhere, a ghost with a pulse, a shadow with a voice, and I couldn't shake him, couldn't outrun him, couldn't stop seeing that red slash in every blink. A new post dropped as the fog thinned. A user claiming a 6 mark, a black circle scrawled on a subway wall downtown, no proof, just a whisper in all caps. Check the tunnels now! And my blood ran cold, my hands gripping the wheel, the city sprawling wet and wild around me, Shadow's grip strangling tighter, the world begging for truth, for him, for the next hit, and I was diving in, lost, hooked, drowning in the echo of gear, terrified of what it'd summon next, what it'd force us to face. The 6 mark was a void, a perfect black circle scrawled across the grimy tiles of a subway tunnel wall downtown, its edges sharp and deliberate, swallowing the dim light of flickering fluorescence. The word beneath, scratched inside it in thin, ghostly white, a whisper that echoed louder than a scream in the damp, echoing guts of the city. I chased the tip from the forum, my car abandoned at street level, my boots pounding down concrete steps into the subway's stale underbelly, the air thick with mildew, piss, and the low rumble of trains vibrating through the walls, my flashlight cutting through shadows as I found it, hidden in a service tunnel off the main line, the circle stark against the filth, its presence cold, calculated, a hole punched into the world's skin. I steadied my camera, my breath fogging in the chill, the flash popping against the black, the word beneath, glowing faint and frail inside, a riddle, a threat, a pull I couldn't resist. I stood there, the tunnel's drip echoing in my ears, my coat heavy with sweat and grime, my eyes locked on the mark, my gut churning with a certainty this was deeper, darker, shadow burrowing under us all. I uploaded it from the platform above, my signal weak in the concrete maze, my fingers trembling on the keys, my post blunt. 6 sign. Subway. Shadows beneath us. And the internet shattered, servers groaning under the surge, threads spawning like fractures, Shadow's name a tidal wave crashing every platform, users clawing at the black circle, the word, the shift from open air to underground, from red slashes to this silent, swallowing void, millions watching, millions guessing, millions fearing what lay below. I lingered in the tunnel, the air pressing against my chest, my flashlight tracing the circle's edges, the paint dry but fresh, the white letters faint like bones under flesh. 6 signs, 6 words, each a step into shadow, each a howl tearing through the city's veins, each a disaster waiting to claw its way up, and this one felt buried, secret, a true shadow wanted us to dig for. Then it hit. A sewer main rupture that night, streets flooding downtown, water surging black and foul from manholes, cars swamped, basements drowned, no deaths, but the stench and chaos choking the city, and the forums roared, beneath, lashed to the flood, the black circle a trapdoor to ruin. I ran to the surface, my boots splashing through rising water, my radio crackling with emergency alerts, my phone buzzing wild. My screen a deluge of posts. Users swearing the circle size matched the rupture's epicenter. A wild leap that stuck like mud, others digging into city blueprints, tying it to Shadow's timing, his reach, his malice, their words frantic, rabid, alive with dread and wonder. My inbox was a swamp. Tips from transit workers claiming they'd seen a figure in the tunnels. A grainy still from a platform cam. A shadow in a hoodie, black paint on their gloves, vanishing into the dark, enough to fuel the hunt, enough to chain me tighter to the abyss. I stood on a flooded street, my boots soaked, my chest heaving, my ears ringing with sirens and the slosh of water against curbs. The city's pulse thrashed with mine, every shadow a stalker, every wall a grave, Shadow's legend growing roots, sinking them into the earth, into us all. The threads anointed him a subterranean king by dawn, a shadow lord pulling levers from below, his marks no longer signs but summons. News trucks clogging the streets, my shots on every feed. Shadows underground. Terror, in bold, glaring red, my name a murmur in the static, lost in the howl of a world enthralled. I sat in my car, the engine idling, my laptop flickering on the dash, my notes a snarl of maps, sewer lines, and desperate guesses, 6 signs, 6 disasters, a code I couldn't break, a chase I couldn't flee. The air was rank, my coffee cold and sour, my head splitting. Shadow was everywhere, nowhere, a ghost with a will, a shadow with a plan, and I couldn't shake him, couldn't outrun him, couldn't stop seeing that black circle in every blink. A new post dropped as the water receded. A user claiming a 7th mark, a silver web on a cathedral spire, no proof, just a scream in all caps. Look up now! And my blood froze, my hands gripping the wheel, the city sprawling wet and wild around me, Shadow's grip strangling tighter, the world begging for truth, for him, for the next strike, and I was diving deeper, lost, hooked, drowning in the echo of beneath. Terrified of what he'd drag up next, what he'd bury us under. The 7th mark was a shimmer, a sprawling web of silver paint spun across the Gothic spire of an old cathedral downtown, its delicate threads glinting under a bruised twilight sky, the structure stone-worn and blackened by time, the word, above, etched and faint, shimmering strokes at the web's heart, a whisper that pierced the city's hum like a needle through skin. I'd chased the tip from the forum, my car tearing through streets still slick from the sewer flood, the cathedral's silhouette clawing the horizon, its spire a jagged finger against the fading light, the air thick with exhaust and the distant toll of bells, my headlights catching the silver as I pulled up, my breath snagging at the sight. Intricate, ghostly, commanding, the web sprawling across the stone, a trap woven in plain sight. A signal I couldn't unsee. I climbed out, my boots crunching on wet gravel, my camera steady despite the tremor in my hands, the flash popping against the silver, the word, above, glowing faint and ethereal at the center, a call, a threat, a lure that sank claws into my chest. I stood there, the wind whipping my coat, my ears full of traffic and the cathedral's low hum, my eyes locked on the web, my gut twisting with a certainty this was higher, stranger. Shadow climbing above us all. I posted it from the church steps, my fingers stiff in the cold, my signal strong for once, my words sharp. Seventh sign. Cathedral. Shadows above us. And the internet ruptured, servers buckling under the tidal wave of traffic, threads sprouting like vines, Shadow's name a lightning strike splitting every platform, users clawing at the silver web. The word, the leap from subway voids to spire heights, from black circles to this shimmering snare, millions watching, millions theorizing, millions dreading what loomed overhead. I lingered, the twilight deepening, my flashlight tracing the web's threads, the paint fresh and slick, the silver catching every flicker of light. 7 signs, 7 words, each a step into chaos, each a roar tearing through the city's bones, each a disaster waiting to crash down, and this one felt lofty, distant, a warning shadow wanted us to crane our necks for. Then it struck, a freak lightning storm that night, bolts slashing the sky, a radio tower 3 miles away hit, sparking and collapsing in a shower of metal, no deaths, but power flickering citywide, and the forums exploded, above, lashed to the strike, the silver web a conductor for ruin. I raced to the tower's wreckage, my windshield streaked with rain, my radio crackling with storm warnings, my phone buzzing wild, my screen a torrent of posts, users swearing the web's pattern mimicked. Lightning paths, a wild leap that stuck like static, others digging into weather data, tying it to Shadow's timing, his reach, his wrath, their words frantic, electric, alive with awe and terror. My inbox was a maelstrom, tips from storm chasers claiming they'd seen a figure on the spire before the strike, a blurry still from a drone, a shadow in a hoodie, silver paint on their hands, vanishing into the clouds, enough to fuel the hunt, enough to chain me tighter to the sky. I stood by the fallen tower, my boots sinking in mud, my chest heaving, my ears ringing with thunder and the crunch of twisted steel. The city's pulse thrashed with mine, every shadow a watcher, every wall a perch, Shadow's legend growing wings, sinking talons into the air, into us all. The threads crowned him a storm god by morning, a shadow weaver spitting fate from above, his marks no longer omens but edicts. News choppers circling the cathedral, my shots on every feed. Shadow's heavenly curse. In bold, glaring white, my name a whisper in the static, lost in the scream of a world enthralled. I sat in my car, the engine off, my laptop flickering on the dash, my notes a snarl of maps, weather charts, and desperate guesses, 7 signs, 7 disasters, a code I couldn't crack, a chase I couldn't flee. The air was charged, my coffee cold and sour, my head splitting. Shadow was everywhere, nowhere, a ghost with a storm, a shadow with a crown, and I couldn't shake him, couldn't outrun him, couldn't stop seeing that silver web in every flash. A new post dropped as the rain eased, a user claiming an 8th mark, a gold crescent on a skyscraper roof, no proof, just a yell in all caps. It's higher check now. And my blood ran hot, my hands gripping the wheel, the city sprawling wet and wild around me, Shadow's grip strangling tighter, the world begging for truth, for him, for the next fall, and I was climbing toward it, lost, hooked, drowning in the echo of above, terrified of what he'd rain down next, what he'd shatter from the sky. The 8th mark was ablaze, a gold crescent slashed across the glass roof of a gleaming skyscraper downtown, its curve shimmering under a noon sun that scorched the city raw, the building's sleek lines marred by this bold, molten arc, the word, within, scratched and thin, fiery strokes at its peak, a whisper that burned through the midday haze like a brand on flesh. I chased the tip from the forum, my car weaving through traffic still snarled from the storm, the skyscraper's mirrored face towering above, a monument of steel and wealth, the air thick with heat, and the drone of helicopters overhead, my headlights useless as I parked, my breath catching at the sight, vivid, searing, defiant, the crescent glowing against the glass, a wound carved into the city's pride, a signal I couldn't ignore. I climbed out, my boots sticking to melting asphalt, my camera steady despite the sweat on my palms, the flash popping against the gold, the word, within, flickering faint and fierce at the crest, a call, a threat, a secret that sank hooks into my spine. I stood there, the sun baking my skull, my ears full of horns and the hum of air conditioners, my eyes locked on the crescent, my gut twisting with the certainty this was inside, intimate. Shadow cutting into us all. I posted it from the street. Below, my fingers slick on the screen, my signal strong in the urban sprawl, my words cutting. 8th sign. Skyscraper. Shadows within us. And the internet imploded, servers crashing under the flood, threads spiraling like smoke, Shadow's name a wildfire torching every platform, users clawing at the gold crescent, the word, the leap from spire webs to rooftop flames, from silver to this blazing gold, millions watching, millions guessing, millions fearing what festered inside. I lingered, the heat pressing against my chest, my flashlight useless in the glare, my eyes tracing the crescent's arc, the paint fresh and tacky, the gold catching every ray. 8 signs, 8 words, each a step into ruin, each a howl tearing through the city's core, each a disaster waiting to erupt, and this one felt close, personal, a true shadow wanted us to choke on. Then it struck. An elevator collapsed that afternoon, cables snapping in the skyscraper's guts, a car plunging 20 floors, 2 trapped, 1 dead, the news screaming terror while the forum screamed shadow, within. Lashed to the fall, the gold crescent a crown on the chaos. I raced to the scene, my windshield streaked with dust, my radio crackling with rescue updates, my phone buzzing wild, my screen a torrent of posts. Users swearing the crescent's curve matched the building's layout, a wild leap that stuck like ash, others digging into tenant lists, tying it to Shadow's timing, his reach, his venom, their words frantic, molten, alive with dread and thrill. My inbox was a furnace. Tips from office workers claiming they'd seen a figure on the roof, a blurry still from a lobby cam, a shadow in a hoodie, gold paint on their sleeves, vanishing into a stairwell, enough to fuel the hunt, enough to chain me tighter to the fire. I stood by the cordoned street, my boots on shattered glass, my chest heaving, my ears ringing with sirens and the wail of trapped steel. The city's pulse thrashed with mine, every shadow a traitor, every wall a pyre, Shadow's legend growing flames, sinking them into our bones, into us all. The threads hailed him a fire lord by dusk, a shadow smith forging doom from within, his marks no longer warnings but verdicts, news vans clogging the block. My shots on every feed. Shadow's internal strike. In bold, glaring gold, my name a murmur in the noise, lost in the roar of a world consumed. I sat in my car, the engine off, my laptop flickering on the dash, my notes a snarl of blueprints, timelines, and desperate guesses. 8 signs, 8 disasters, a code I couldn't break, a chase I couldn't flee. The air was stifling, my coffee cold and bitter, my head splitting. Shadow was everywhere, nowhere, a ghost with a torch, a shadow with a forge, and I couldn't shake him, couldn't outrun him, couldn't stop seeing the gold crescent in every glare. A new post dropped as the sun sank, a user claiming a 9th mark, a blue wave on a reservoir dam, no proof, just a scream in all caps. It's wet, go now. And my blood ran cold, my hands gripping the wheel, the city sprawling hot and wild around me, Shadow's grip strangling tighter, the world begging for truth, for him, for the next crash, and I was racing toward it, lost, hooked, drowning in the echo of within, terrified of what he'd burn next, what he'd bury us in. The 9th mark was a tide, a sweeping blue wave crashing across the concrete face of a reservoir dam on the city's outskirts, its crest curling under a pale dawn sky, the structure's gray bulk scarred by this fluid, surging arc, the word beyond, scrawled in thin, dripping strokes at its edge, a whisper that rippled through the morning stillness like a current through deep water. I chased the tip from the forum, my car tearing through pre-dawn streets, the damn silhouette hulking against the horizon, its walls slick with dew, the air thick with damp earth, and the faint roar of spillways, my headlights catching the blue as I screeched to a halt, my breath snagging at the sight. Vivid, flowing, relentless, the waves stretching wide, a flood frozen in paint, a signal I couldn't ignore. I climbed out, my boots sinking in wet grass, my camera steady despite the chill in my hands, the flash popping against the blue, the word beyond, shimmering faint and liquid at the rim, a call, a threat, a horizon that sank hooks into my gut. I stood there, the dawn breaking slow, my ears full of birds and the hum of distant pumps, my eyes locked on the wave, my gut twisting with a certainty this was further, wilder. Shadow reaching past us all. I posted it from the dam's base, my fingers numb. In the cold, my signal weak in the rural sprawl, my words sharp. Ninth sign. Reservoir. Shadows beyond us. And the internet erupted, servers straining under the deluge, threads flooding like rivers, Shadow's name a tsunami smashing every platform, users clawing at the blue wave, the word, the leap from skyscraper gold to this watery sprawl, from fire to flood, millions watching, millions guessing, millions fearing what lay past the edge. I lingered, the sun creeping up, my flashlight tracing the wave's crest, the paint fresh and slick, the blue pooling in cracks, 9 signs, 9 words, each a step into collapse, each a roar tearing through the city's seams, each a disaster waiting to drown us, and this one felt vast, untamed, a true shadow wanted us to chase into the abyss. Then it struck. A dam overflow that morning, gates failing, water surging into the valley below, homes swamped, roads washed out, no deaths, but the flood swallowing lives whole, and the forums roared, beyond, lashed to the deluge, the blue wave a harbinger of ruin. I raced to the flood zone, my windshield streaked with mud, my radio crackling with evacuation orders, my phone buzzing wild, my screen a torrent of posts. Users swearing the waves' arc matched the flood's path, a wild leap that stuck. Like silt, others digging into dam records, tying it to Shadow's timing, his reach, his wrath, their words frantic, soaked, alive with dread and awe. My inbox was a quagmire. Tips from locals claiming they'd seen a figure by the dam at night, a blurry still from a trail cam, a shadow in a hoodie, blue paint on their boots, vanishing into the trees, enough to fuel the hunt, enough to chain me tighter to the tide. I stood by the water's edge, my boots sinking in muck, my chest heaving, my ears ringing with sirens and the rush of fleeing water. The city's pulse thrashed with mine, every shadow a drifter, every wall a shore, Shadow's legend growing currents, sinking them into the earth, into us all. The threads dubbed him a flood king by noon, a shadow tide pulling strings from beyond, his marks no longer threats but prophecies, news drones buzzing the dam. My shots on every feed. Shadow's watery doom. In bold, glaring blue, my name a whisper in the static, lost in the howl of a world enthralled. I sat in my car, the engine off, my laptop flickering on the dash, my notes a snarl of maps, water levels, and desperate guesses, 9 signs, 9 disasters, a code I couldn't break, a chase I couldn't flee. The air was humid, my coffee cold and sour, my head splitting. Shadow was everywhere, nowhere, a ghost with a wave, a shadow with a sea, and I couldn't shake him, couldn't outrun him, couldn't stop seeing that blue wave in every ripple. A new post dropped as the water stilled. A user claiming a tint mark, a white void on a highway overpass, no proof, just a scream in all caps. It's final, find it now. And my blood ran cold, my hands gripping the wheel, the city sprawling wet and wild around me, Shadow's grip strangling tighter, the world begging for truth, for him, for the last strike, and I was racing toward it, lost, hooked, drowning in the echo of beyond. terrified of what he'd unleash next, what he'd sweep us into. The 10th mark was an end. A stark white void blasted across the concrete span of a highway overpass on the city's western rim, its edges crisp and unforgiving, swallowing the gray beneath, the word, always, etched and faint, trembling black at its core, a whisper that rang like a toll through the dusk's heavy silence. I chased the tip from the forum, my car tearing through streets still choked with flood debris, the overpass rising ahead, a brutal slab against a sky bleeding red, the air thick with dust, and the distant wail of traffic, my headlights catching the white as I screeched to a stop, my breath snagging at the sight. Pure, absolute, final, the void sprawling wide, a blankness that devoured everything, a signal I couldn't escape. I climbed out, my boots crunching on gravel, my camera steady despite the weight in my hands, the flash popping against the white, the word, always, flickering faint and fragile inside, a vow, a threat, a chain that sank hooks into my soul. I stood there, the dusk settling cold, my ears full of wind, and the hum of cars below, my eyes locked on the void, my gut twisting with the certainty this was it, the last. Shadow sealing us all in his grip. I posted it from the overpass's edge, my fingers numb. In the chill, my signal strong in the open air, my words cutting. 10th sign. Overpass. Shadow's always here. And the internet collapsed, servers crashing under the weight of billions, threads shattering like glass, Shadow's name a supernova torching every platform, users clawing at the white void, the word, the leap from blue waves to this endless blank, from flood to forever, billions watching, billions guessing, billions fearing what lingered eternal. I lingered, the night creeping in, my flashlight tracing the void's edges, the paint dry but fresh, the white blinding even in shadow. 10 signs, 10 words, each a step into oblivion, each a scream tearing through the city's marrow, each a disaster that had landed, and this one felt timeless, boundless, a truth Shadow wanted us to live with forever. Then it struck, a massive pileup that night, the overpass buckling under a chain of crashes, steel bending, concrete cracking, 5 dead, dozens trapped, the news screaming carnage while the forum screamed Shadow, always, lashed to the wreck, the white void a tombstone for the end. I raced to the chaos, my windshield streaked with dust and blood-red dusk, my radio crackling with rescue chatter, my phone buzzing wild, my screen a torrent of posts. Users swearing the void shape framed the crash. Sight, a wild leap that stuck like cement, others digging into traffic logs, tying it to Shadow's timing, his reach, his finality, their words frantic, broken, alive with dread and closure. My inbox was a graveyard. Tips from drivers claiming they'd seen a figure on the overpass at dusk, a blurry still from a dashcam, a shadow in a hoodie, white paint on their hands, vanishing into the night, enough to fuel the hunt, enough to chain me to the end. I stood by the wreckage, my boots on shattered asphalt, my chest heaving, my ears ringing with sirens and the groan of twisted metal. The city's pulse stopped with mine, every shadow a memory, every wall a monument, Shadow's legend growing infinite, sinking into time, into us all. The threads crowned him eternal by midnight, a shadow god who'd written his reign, his marks no longer acts but legacies, news crews swarming the overpass. My shots on every feed. Shadow's final blow. In bold, glaring, white, my name a ghost in the credits, lost in the wail of a world transformed. I sat in my car, the engine off, my laptop dead on the dash, my notes a snarl of maps, dates, and faded guesses. 10 signs, 10 disasters, a code I couldn't break, a chase that broke me. The air was still, my coffee cold and sour, my head empty. Shadow was everywhere, nowhere, a ghost with a throne, a shadow with a name, and I couldn't shake him, couldn't outrun him, couldn't stop seeing that white void in every breath. The forum slowed, the hunt faded, the world exhaled, but a final post dropped as the night deepened. A user claiming they'd seen him, A figure in a hoodie, standing by the first mural, no paint, just watching, no proof, just a whisper. He's still here. And my blood froze, my hands empty, the city sprawling dark and wild around me, shadows grip eternal, the world changed, forever his, and I was left staring, lost, hooked, drowning in the echo of always, terrified he'd never stop, that he'd always be.